How's it going, everybody? Today I'm going to be talking about The Bad Batch, and this is probably going to be the last video on the channel specifically about The Bad Batch because, as I'm sure you all know, the show has ended. There won't be any more Bad Batch, so we're going to be reviewing the entirety of the show today. As a quick side note before we start, if you can see my nipples through this shirt, I apologize. But we're not here to talk about that today, so let's talk about The Bad Batch. It feels like this show was announced not that long ago, and yet we've already got 3 seasons, and the show has ended. And ever since this show debuted, it's been very hard for me to rank it amongst other Star Wars things, or just shows in general. And the reason for that is I feel like we went a little bit too Clone Wars with it. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, let me explain. The Bad Batch is a show that follows the Bad Batch, Clone Force 99, and Omega once she joins the group. And even when Crosshair splits off into doing his own thing with the Empire, we still follow him to a degree. And as we all know, the Clone Wars followed a vast variety of characters who had their own arcs and solo episodes. And the Clone Wars was kind of designed to be able to follow a bunch of different characters and do a story here, a story there. We're gonna set this up here and we're gonna come back to it in like 2 or 3 seasons. And I feel like The Bad Batch tries to do that in a way, but it's just not a show that was set up and designed to be able to. The Bad Batch at times seems to fall into this formula of, let's go here this one episode and help this one person. Let's go here this one episode and help this other group of people. And nothing ever comes back around, really. We have some things that connect from episode to episode or from this season to the next season, but there's a lot of things that just don't. And I feel like that's something that is more suited to the Clone Wars, which is more of an anthology. You've got the story of this character, the story of that character, and it's left open-ended because you can pick those back up at any point in other shows. But I feel like The Bad Batch as a show was designed to follow our titular characters a bit more, and so all of these side characters that were introduced, set up, kind of feel just inconsequential in the grand scheme of the show. And I was gonna make this a separate point, but it kind of is the same point now that I'm thinking about it, and that is that The Bad Batch has a very big problem with its side characters. For example, they brought Commander Cody into season 2 for one episode, the episode with Crosshair, and it almost feels like now, looking back, he was used as a plot device rather than a character. It seems as though Commander Cody was only in that episode because Crosshair knew who he was, and to get him thinking about the Empire. And ultimately, that doesn't pan out for a while. We still get a bit more with Crosshair before he finally turns on the Empire. But it feels like Commander Cody was just there as a plot device, and his character was kind of just thrown by the wayside after that. We hear that he's gone AWOL, and he's gone, and he's not coming back in the show at any point. And we probably won't continue that story at any point in the future because when would we? So it kind of just feels like we introduced that and didn't follow through on it. It never came back around. And if that's not a good enough example for you, let's take another look at season 2. That kid that steals the Marauder in, I believe it was a duology of episodes, he, at the end of that final episode of that duology, says, if you ever need anything, then let me know, or something like that. And that kind of feels like setup. That's dialogue that's meant to be set up, and it just never comes back around in any way. We never mention him, we never see him, nothing. I doubt we'll see him in future projects. That's just a character that kind of gets forgotten. Let's talk about Scorch. I haven't seen anything in particular from anybody, but I know that there are other people out there like me who think that he was brought into this show to be sort of like a cameo almost. He had very little to do, and then he was killed off very unceremoniously, and it just feels like a waste of such a cool character. And I know there's probably some people out there who are probably just happy to see him, who thought that the cameo was good enough. But in my opinion, you should have just replaced him with a new character, a new commando that we don't know. You would be able to completely avoid the group of people who are fans of the game who think that his character was wasted. And what's unfortunate now is that with him being killed off unceremoniously, you rob the possibility of having Republic Commando as a show or seeing them in future projects as well. And I have a few more examples, but I'm gonna end on just this one, so I'm not super long-winded with the examples. Ventress. They retconned Ventress's death in Dark Disciple to bring her into this one episode of The Bad Batch Season 3. And that's kind of a waste because Dark Disciple is a story that is generally very liked. And not only that, we don't have any stories lined up for the future that she's likely to appear in. So it's highly possible that we brought her back to life, retconned her death, just to have her in this one episode of The Bad Batch. And if you ask me, it wasn't worth it. I enjoyed seeing her, I enjoyed the character, of course I always have, and it's nice to have the voice actress back, but one episode of The Bad Batch does not justify retconning a great death that was written for a character. Especially considering that it wasn't vital for it to be Ventress in this episode. We could have had it been a Jedi survivor or someone else, who's a Force user. It wasn't necessary that it was Ventress. So you could have replaced her and kept her death and it would have been fine. I just don't like how we have a lot of side characters, a lot of familiar faces and new characters who are kind of just introduced and then their stories are all left open-ended. Like it feels like we didn't wrap up any of the stories for any of our side characters. If it wasn't someone who died, or it wasn't our core group, then the story is just left open-ended. I know I started this review off on a pretty critical note, but I do want to point out that I did still really enjoy this show. It just has its flaws, and they stick out a little bit more to me than that of Clone Wars or Star Wars Rebels or a show like that. Even Tales of the Jedi I feel like is more concise storytelling than The Bad Batch had. There are a good chunk of episodes in this show that I think can technically be classed as filler. And now I'm not saying that these stories don't hold weight and that they don't contribute to the larger story, but what I'm saying is they don't do it very much. And if you took them out, they wouldn't really detract from the main story in a significant way. And now I will say I'm not the biggest critic of filler episodes because I do enjoy character building just for the sake of character building, developing relationships, and not necessarily needing to further the main story. But I think what trips me up about this show in particular is that there aren't many episodes. It's 3 seasons and there's not a plethora of episodes per season. And so you get 7, 8 filler episodes, and comparatively, it stands out a lot more compared to like an anime that has filler, but this anime has 900 episodes. You know what I'm saying? It just feels like we've got a story point for the main story here, and then we skip an episode and we've got the next point of the story, and then we skip an episode and we got the next point of the story. It just feels like things are spaced out and it's not condensed enough for me. I would have liked 3 seasons of this show. Same amount of episodes, just cut out some of the unnecessary bits and have some more furtherance of the story. Furtherance, is that a word? I don't know. But you know what I'm trying to say. As much as I hate to say it, I think that this show has a real weakness in its pacing. From time to time, the pacing is pretty good. But then sometimes just in the middle of seasons, the pacing just falls apart. But let's not forget that this is a Star Wars show, which means it has some great strengths as well. Sound design and music are incredible, just as they are in every Star Wars project. And this show is even more beautiful than a lot of its animated counterparts, because animation continues to improve with Lucasfilm Animation. And while there are times in this show when I feel like the character development of certain Bad Batch members isn't quite what I was expecting it to be, I will say they did an incredible job introducing Omega in this show, and by the end making her a fan favorite. I think that's something that Star Wars does really well, especially with its animated shows. They did that with Ahsoka in the Clone Wars, they did that with Ezra, and a lot of other characters, especially young characters that viewers can often find annoying when they're first introduced, but by the end they make them characters that are beloved by the community. As I mentioned previously, I do have a bit of an issue with this show's pacing, but I feel like what we do get of the main story is really good. There are some concepts that are introduced in this show that fill in different Star Wars stories. As I talked about in the last Bad Batch video I made, the one about Season 3, I really enjoyed the continuation of the Zillo Beast arc, the conclusion of the Zillo Beast arc, which started how many years ago in the Clone Wars. I'm glad that they followed through with that. And I'm also glad we got some of Project Necromancer. That was kind of thrown into the sequels on a whim, seemingly. The whole 2 directors and 2 different visions problem. But we've gone back now with The Mandalorian and with The Bad Batch and laid some foundation. And I'm glad we did that in The Bad Batch, because while it doesn't necessarily fix the problems of the sequels, it definitely helps out. It definitely makes things feel a little bit more natural, story-wise. Going into this video, I felt like I would have so much to say because I was reviewing the show as a whole, but I feel like I've already covered everything that I need to cover. I've already touched on some things for Bad Batch Season 3 and other videos. If you're interested in my opinions on the ending of the show or the future of the characters, go check that out. What I will say is I really hope we do get Omega in a future show. Spoiler alert if you haven't seen it, she survives and there's a time skip. And I feel like it would be perfect to put her in like Andor Season 2 or something like that. Whether or not they do that remains to be seen, but I really hope we can find a way to fit that in at some point. To sum up my feelings about this show as we wrap up, I really enjoyed this show. I think it's a fun show. Definitely characters that you can root for. What I will say is this, it's not Clone Wars, it's not Rebels. The story just isn't quite as compelling as those, and the writing and pacing just isn't quite on par. But all things considered, this is definitely a fun show. If you told me this was your favorite Star Wars show, I would disagree, but I can definitely see an argument for it. And the reason why I bring that up is because lately on TikTok, especially during the last few episodes of the show, on TikTok I saw a bunch of people saying, we're about to say goodbye to our favorite characters. And I thought to myself, our favorite characters, huh? I don't know if anyone from this show in the core group, the Bad Batch, are my favorite characters. I really like their characters. I enjoy their characters. I never really thought about them as my favorite characters though, but maybe that's just me. I grew up a little bit more with Clone Wars. I watched it as it was airing when I was, preteen, teenager, and then Rebels in my late teens. But maybe today's teens are growing up with Bad Batch and that's their show. And if that's the case, then cool, because that means that new fans are connecting with new Star Wars. But to keep this a bit shorter, I think that's all I have to say about the Bad Batch. What did you think of this show? Was it your favorite? Was it top 3? Let me know what you thought of it. But if you made it to the end of the video, thanks for sticking around. I'm still trying to grow the channel, and if you want to help me with the algorithm, you can like, comment, and subscribe, and that would help me out a lot. But other than that, until next time, bye.